Okay.
Hello and welcome to it's a pleasure to welcome you today. The Struggles to Success podcast is about sharing people's stories and lessons of turning a struggle into success so that other people can learn from it. A struggle can in fact be a gift. Problems are in fact gifts if you use them well. And a wise person learns from their own mistakes, but an even wiser person learns from other people's mistakes. And so today I have the pleasure of welcoming our special guest, who is Professor Konrad Reinhart. Professor Konrad Reinhart is somebody I've known for a while, since I'm also involved in sepsis improvement. He is considered widely as the father of sepsis improvement globally. He's an international sepsis champion. Professor Konrad at the moment is chair of the German Sepsis Foundation. He is the founding president of the Global Sepsis Alliance and also was a previous chair of the International Sepsis Forum. He was also the founding president of the German Sepsis Society, so clearly led sepsis improvement within the continent, within Germany, and also internationally. He also created the Center for Sepsis Control and Care, CSCC, at Jena University Hospital, and he's published over 750 peer-reviewed articles, so he's well published. He's also won numerous awards, Research Award of the Federal State of Thuringia, Germany, and other international awards. Most recently, I think he was given a sepsis award in recognition of all the work he's done for sepsis globally by the Swedish Sepsis Alliance. So it's really a pleasure to welcome Professor Konrad today. Professor Konrad, you're very welcome.
Yeah, the pleasure is on my side. And thanks to addressing such question. You see, just to let you know what my background is in terms of family. So my father was one of 8 boys, a farmer. My mother was also from the countryside. And so I grew up after German war and overcoming the fascist area, and I was not a good pupil at school. It took me, to shorten this story, almost 22 years to get what is called the baccalaureate, to be able to study at the university. And then actually first mishap that I had really in the context that in the last year before doing this baccalaureate, I got tuberculosis, which prevented me actually to not be able the whole year at school. But they offered me the opportunity still to participate in the final exams. And it turned out quite reasonably, but it would have been never enough to get what is called the numerus clausus, access to a medical, to studying medicine. So, and I even was discouraged by the treating physician when I first came to a hospital with this diagnosis, who asked me what I want to do. I said, I wanted to study. Oh, forget about studying medicine. So anyway, finally, the opportunity was that there was a thing just to have, if you have such a bad luck at school in the last year due to a disease, there were some possibilities to apply for a special application. And by doing this, I got 2 offers, and one in Munich and one in Frankfurt. So I choose Munich anyway. So I tell you this because I could who needed to wait for several years otherwise to get a place at university to study what I wanted to do. So, and to overcome, to go to the next step, I had no plan anyway. The time in the early 70s, where the students' movement has been a very political time, and I catched up with some ideas that I hadn't heard enough, and about history and about politics and back and so forth, and was more focused on, when I then moved to Berlin for this reason, because in Berlin there was the epicenter, like in Paris for France, in these late 60s and early 70s. And I made good friends, and we had some crazy ideas. But on the other hand, I became also part of the founding movement for the predecessors of the Green Party in Germany, and so then I even struggled to get into public hospitals, because there was such a thing called Berufsverbot for students, or not only students, who were in doubt whether they would agree with the constitution and back and so forth. So I started in the Catholic hospital. And that's also part of this story. Anyway, I then got, after 1 or 2 years at a university hospital, just because there were some friends who helped me to get in, who were in anesthesia and intensive care. And then after some time, having been doing this for 1 or 2 years, there was a big shortage of physicians already at this time, and I had to go to the ICU. And in the ICU, I realized that for the first time, there's such thing like sepsis, which I hadn't heard anything during my studies. And when I looked up also the kind of literature or publication, there was very little. There were no guidelines. There were no numbers. There were no funding and back and so forth. But what I learned there was also that I didn't want just to stay in the OR and do anesthesia, and I also did not. I felt that I did not get a good education in intensive care medicine, also because this was only 15 years after for intensive care medicine developed. And you may imagine that also at this time there were a bad educational system, because the German medical system was and still is to some degree very feudalistic, hierarchic, and also upcoming disciplines like anesthesia and intensive care. So this was not appreciated by the big, by surgery, internal medicine, and back and so forth. So, and I tried to learn. I experienced already at this time really tragedies. That one young woman, a colleague, a doctor, 3 weeks that after she had delivered her baby, she went to the emergency department at this university hospital in Berlin. She was fast brought to our ICU, but within 24 hours she was dead. And so obviously she was, although he was a physician, it was not known to her that obviously there was also some delay until she came to the hospital. And so it was not, this kind of experiences made me then, when I got the chance by my former boss to organize a kind of in the national meeting, there were some people, many, but occasionally, who really had started to think about sepsis, and so in some way we called this symposium "Sepsis is an international challenge," and back and so forth, and then I made my I understood also at this time that I wanted to go into research, maybe also to stay at the university, because for whatever reason I had this interest, and by convening great people who have been successful and interested in the same areas, I learned a lot from others. So this, I think, that's what one lesson. If you don't be raised in a very established, historic, successful family, and back and so forth, who know what the pathways to success have been in the history, that this is the background of our aristocrats and back and so forth, who know, and I all had to learn this, although my first thing was not to get successful as such, but just when and this is aftermath again, when I faced issues where I have not the notion that they are optimally understood, handled, and so this intrigued me to learn first further, and then I didn't do well also during the university, so I had a good exam at the end, but this was helpful. But still, I had to learn how to lead the literature and to understand how to interpret things, also to understand that there's a lot of biases and bad influence also in industry. By industry, although industry is very important to make progress in medicine. So all these kind of issues, came across, and then I understood I need to do habilitation is just to be able every time also to some degree it's been considered to be done after the work.
In addition to
the work in this, so these are.
If you don't mind me, so sorry to interrupt your flow, but just to give you a bit of a breath as well. You've mentioned so many things that are of interest in the last 5 minutes we've had the conversation. Just also to tell the people listening that we are actually in a conference in Ethiopia, a sepsis conference in Ethiopia, and I took the opportunity to interview the things that you've said today that I wasn't aware of. You've mentioned your humble beginnings. You don't come from a rich family. You've also mentioned that you, at the stage when you're trying to get into medical school, you didn't actually have really good results. You went to medical school, did well, managed to get a place into training as an anesthetist and an intensivist, and it wasn't the traditional route. And all you did this through opportunities. Most people who will see all you've done now, and I introduce you with over 750 peer-reviewed article publication, and all you've done with Global Sepsis Alliance, and won't actually appreciate the journey. And it wasn't a walk in the park. And you've had to overcome a lot of adversities to get to where you are now, as well as use opportunities that came to you. For example, as you mentioned, going to the Catholic hospital first, and then you use a lot of problems throughout your career and your life to get to where you are now, to be so successful. So it was neither planned, but it was that I felt I need to have the liberty not to be bound until the end of my life, just
working in one thing, let me see, as an anesthesiologist in the OR, or even as an intensivist at the end of the day in the ICU, but also but this was also important that I learned during the students' time and these political times that policy is important, that you learn how important freedom of thought is, but also access to literature, and that you are in an environment which is not hostile to innovation, although to get successful in research, which was not yet a culture even at this new built university hospital. So there was a lot to overcome, of course.
It seems as if you've made your own career. It wasn't structured. It wasn't.
No,
it wasn't. There wasn't a system, but you seem to have built it.
Yeah. So I was proud, of course. Then there were, if not labs, but I looked what are the surgeons doing, what are the internal medicine people, which were more advanced discipline. So they had understood. So if they want to do some career for whatever purpose, many careers are driven by being important, by earn a lot of money and back and so forth. So this was not my primary thing, but I wanted to be at least to have the options and to get more degrees of freedom in terms of times, not being just determined by my superiors or so. And luckily I had a boss who left. He was not able to teach me because in some way along this, how to plan a career or even to organize his department in a way that it. So he, in some way, he must have recognized that I am driven and able to do some things which I not really knew, but because I was engaged, you see, just to have to understand. And so yeah. And coming to sepsis now, the thing really was that the more I also had contacts to other healthcare systems, like in the US, there I learned that most of these physicians and clinical researchers, they had about 50 up to 70% of their time to doing research. I also learned over time that there is quality assuring measures and that there are figures on outcomes, figures on numbers of certain diseases, which was not the case in many other countries, including Germany. And then they're having found fun in speaking to others on what I thought I had learned at this time, and there was no competition in the field of sepsis. Actually, this might also have been very successful, and it took until now. And as you may know, I'm 76. There's just a lot of time to improvement, and perhaps I also became successful because I experienced or found out that there's an area nobody cares about.
So you chose something. You saw something where there was a gap.
A gap and a lot of suffering.
A lot of suffering.
And the more actually perhaps we had need, we send a plus to better understand the epidemiology of sepsis. We create just program for quite a number number of important, like depression and cardiology and heart infarct and issue like this. They got 25 million for 5 years. We were sitting on what is called in German the cat table. You see, we got 5 million. But again, this, and they asked, we just finance your kind of your structure, but the money for research you need to try to get from somebody else. And the good thing was that at this time, Eli Lilly, a big company who thought, and they had a product which was proven to be very active and reduced mortality to 15% or in some range. Even the trial was stopped prematurely, and they got so they understood they cannot sell a product on a disease which is not known, for which are no guidelines and no awareness in the whatever. So what they were able to do, and this was the birth of the so-called Surviving Sepsis campaign. They obviously hired a company and also worked with the Institute of Healthcare Improvement. And along this line, we were able, with this network, to get 1 million Deutschmarks at this time for a study to understand how many sepsis cases are in Germany. And we came up that it was 5 times as higher. It was documented already at this time in the kind of ICD classification. And with this data, actually, we came into the media for the first time, be it the Spiegel or the major public TV stuff and weeklies and etc. And all of a sudden, after we were in the media and we had published, of course, also this data, there were a lot of people calling us. I was at Jena at this time, where I took over a department of anesthesia and intensive care, and asked us, because they had heard for the first time on a disease where they thought it was only their personal fate to get. And then this actually was, and we published this study in 2003, and this happened then. This cause was the birthday in somehow the beginning of the self-help group, the German Sepsis Aid. But still, there was a long way to go. Then we attracted more funding because there were guidelines. In the meanwhile, only after this Eli Lilly Surviving Sepsis campaign, they stipulated that guidelines would be developed, and there was a lot on some companies' side. This was it was understood that there's also a thing like septic shock, and you need to treat also sepsis with volume. You have to stabilize the circulation fast. And that was a time where there was this kind of synthetic colloids, which were claimed to remain longer in the circulation and would stabilize it. And we, to make this short, investigated, also with support by a company called Braun Melzungen, a big B. Braun now. They gave us some money because these compounds have been in the market long time, but nobody had really assessed the safety of these drugs. And to make this story short, we compared this to crystalloids, so the normal fluids. So, and surprisingly, our hypothesis that by getting up this blood pressure faster was true, but mortality at the end of the day was significantly higher, and the incidence of renal failure, kidney failure, was very high. And this only came out after because we did this study over 90 days, and all primary study looked on only for 24 hours or 3 days, and you don't see so anyway. So, but what I also had to learn there, because one company called Fresenius was the world market leader in selling this compound. And I was the enemy, you see. And there were,
especially after that result.
After this result, whereas as this company, which was a family-run company, this B. Braun, they accepted these results, and that there might be other alternatives, etc. And I had a hard time. Also my professional society of anesthesiology, as most societies were heavily dependent on their support of companies like, and Fresenius was not the only one, just the biggest one. So they did not want to believe these results. So I had a struggle, and at the end, to make this short, we got FDA and EMA to stop it at least for further use on the ICU and the in sepsis patients. So these are the, and in retrospect, you see, and I was not I was so disappointed. Yeah. So, and this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine.
The article.
Yeah. This article, and I was invited to EMA and FDA, and we wanted that our results would have impact on the guidelines and so forth. But it was hard, and it got finally into the guidelines also. But there were so much resistance, and what I learned already at this times is that the difference between success and failure is really persistence. And there were really attacks on me personally. There were people, famous people. I can one who is known also in the field, in the area of intensive care medicine, which is Antonio Gadignoni, and he said, when I did such a presentation, actually, I will never forget whether I would have bodyguards. Yeah, you see,
was that threatening?
Yeah, and you see, there were in some privately financed brochures of some small companies who are specialized on, I would call, fake news, just to promote some products. They attacked me that the numbers on sepsis were much too high, that I was publicizing back and so forth, and my university actually had to go, not to have a regular lawyer, but a lawyer who is specialized against it, and this ended in some kind. So it was hard, this fight, but my only protection was that all what I said was based on facts. One thing, what you wanted to know, that what I learned on this journey is that you need to stick on what you believe in. And what you believe is true. And surprising for me, coming from a kind of naive pharma environment, Catholic brave, and in some way, but there was still some decency and some values, and to stick to values in some way.
Continue doing what is right.
And what you think is right. Of course, sometimes also I am wrong, but at the end, you see, it was a similar fight to get, and it's still ongoing, to get acceptance on the magnitude of the problem. In two terms, how high the numbers are overall, and how come, and this is another thing what I realized by comparing the outcomes from sepsis from countries where I have good friends in Australia, which are published, and in the middle in Sweden, and also in the US, so that quality improvement campaigns work. And still in my country, for example, sepsis mortality is still twice as high, although we are the champions with the number of ICU beds. We spend 40% more resources on sepsis, not on sepsis, on for the healthcare system as such. But in an international comparison for Europe, we rank on place 17, and the criterion is, and even sepsis deaths are not comprised in this. We rank between Slovenia and Greece at rank 17. So, and also policymakers don't like to hear some numbers, but on the other hand, we gave not up. We could convince, as you may know, one German Minister of Health in 2017 to go along with us after we had founded the Global Sepsis Alliance in 2010 with friends from the US and quite a number of other countries. So just to bring these fully recognized topic on the agenda. And yeah, I stop here now for some more questions by you, but because it's just, of course, a small part, and la lotta continua, as you know. We got it finally via the current German minister on the G7 and communique in 2022. However, it was forgotten in the communique for the G7 thing in 2023, where the word sepsis, given that it's the #1 killer worldwide, and especially a preventable killer.
#1 preventable killer. So the audience is broad. The audience listening to this podcast, not everybody would know what sepsis is.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether you've already mentioned the scale of the problem, and you were just about to say it's the #1 preventable cause of death worldwide. Do you also want to just explain what sepsis is to the audience listening to this podcast?
Yeah, with pleasure, because if you don't know about sepsis, or poor knowledge on sepsis kills you, because it's basically the most severe complication of any infection, and it's appears when our body's own defense and mostly immune system fails to limit and to confine sepsis locally, and when then pathogens go into the bloodstream, a kind of chain reaction is induced, which not only is killing or trying to kill, and obviously this works to some degree, the pathogens, but also makes damage to the body's own organs and tissues. And that's, for example, is the reason why during COVID-19, the ICUs, first in Italy, but also then in New York and everywhere, were spillover, and there were these body bags and back and so. But also at this time, it was not yet understood that also viral sepsis, like Ebola, like yellow fever, like dengue, like influenza, causes sepsis by the same mechanisms. And that's why we had to learn a lot from other diseases. And
so for the audience, sepsis is a common condition. There are 50 million cases of sepsis every year in the world. And it's a condition, as Dr. Konrad was saying, Professor Konrad was saying, where your immune system overreacts to an infection, and then your organs fail, and then potentially leads to death if not recognized early and treated. But it's been neglected for many years. And I introduced Professor Konrad as the father of sepsis improvement globally, because he has taken a condition which was not really recognized and not being addressed, and there's now global work being done in all continents to improve sepsis recognition and management. And Professor Konrad, you mentioned your story started when, as a intensive care physician, you looked after a pregnant woman who came into the hospital with sepsis and passed away, and then you recognized how severe the condition was and how neglected it was. And then you started the journey of research with all the challenges that you went through, which you've described. And there's so many lessons from that. Lesson of persistence, a lesson of staying true to what you believe, especially when it's right, and the pressure from other people to stop you doing the right thing, and you were steadfast in your efforts to continue sepsis improvement and publish data to improve care. So it's really, really fascinating. I wonder also, I was going to ask you, if you took a condition you recognize at all and to a condition that not people are aware of, they still need to improve awareness, but it's gone a long way. There's a global sepsis line also has been created, done a lot of work with WHO. There's a World Health Assembly resolution on sepsis, also thanks to the work that you've done, and there are alliances in different regions, including the African Sepsis Alliance, which I chair, and the reason why we're in Africa this week. So I wonder how do you? It's amazing being able to take something like that and bring global change. Often people will just do a little bit of improvement and they're happy with that. What drives you to take something like that globally and tackle a global problem?
Yeah, you see, one must know that there was a time where Sir William Osler, around 1900, who was one of the most famous clinical physician of his time, he said, in 1898, mankind has big enemies. One is hunger, one is war, and the other is fever. And by far, fever is the largest problem. And even during World War II, the British Army, in the fight against the invasion by the Germans and the Japanese, etc., sent out big posters with a headline, where to help Hitler. And this was about what they called sepsis, alias blood poisoning, uses Blitz methods. And they informed and encouraged the soldiers to look for the first early signs of sepsis. And because if they would not, and if they would neglect themselves, they would help Hitler. So don't help Hitler. If you take, and the question for me then was, of course, how come? And this also, that all of a sudden, when I went to school and later on to medical school, such a development, and also all pandemics, of course, which have accompanied mankind all the time, as old as mankind is. And ironically, and I have mentioned this also, I think, yesterday in my presentation here, that the success in the fight against sepsis, which happened in the high-income countries, like not only the US, but these are in this case, I think, the one who have the best data on it. You must understand that in 1900, when Sir William Osler made this quote, the crude mortality rate per 100,000 population was 800 by infections. And this was reduced by just focusing on public health measures, like to having in every city and every federal state departments of public health. They looked for better sanitation. They looked for chlorination of water. They fostered the development of vaccines and also vaccination. And then came scientists who developed antimicrobials, like Paul Ehrlich, but then Fleming and Kane and penicillin. And there was also this Salk vaccines. And there was a gradual, dramatic decrease until in the 50s of the 19th century, where this crude mortality rate, it was only 50 per 100,000 population. And not surprisingly, if you look at this curve, and this is published, this own decline was only interrupted by the Spanish flu, which also induced other medical disciplines, which of course are also important. It started with the cancer people, because there was no cure for cancer at this time. But they got together, patients and scientists and clinicians who were interested. And this is all summarized in this well-published book, also awarded with a Pulitzer Prize, Sepsis, it was called Cancer, the Emperor of all maladies. And he tells the story, and they said, they very fast understood that to transform a disease scientifically, meaning to development the tools to fight it adequately, a disease needs to be transformed politically before it can be transformed scientifically. So they had in the newspapers like Washington Post, Mr. Nixon, you can cure cancer. They had asked for a Manhattan Project against cancer. They have asked for a moonshot. They were able to get famous big football stadiums and to be in public radio to talk on like also children died from leukemia, etc., etc. So and then, because there were Surgeon Generals who are supposed to have said the book of infectious diseases can be closed, and in parallel, also other disciplines developed and got organized, got very strong, were able to influence also the National Institute of Health, had a big influence in the research organizations. And this was not only cancer, this was neurology, this was cardiology, especially because there more and more medications came up, and this marginalization of infectious diseases, because it was no longer attractive, because there were no medications at these times, except for perhaps vaccines and not that many. Then also industry went in these fields because they had products, be diabetes and insulin but also other medications. So, and they of course worked together rightly in this way, but there was no longer an interest. And even in many countries like Germany, infectious diseases until the pandemic came again was not even a specialty on its own. So that took me some time to understand how come that I haven't heard anything during my studies on sepsis, that there was no data, no guidelines,
no teaching in medical school.
No teaching medical school, that also, you see, is still in 2012, when this Rory Staunton case, where a young boy with 12 years hurt himself, had a scratch during basketball. 3 days later in the US, he was dead because he was sent home from an emergency department with a diagnosis of diarrhea. And these parents looked up the A to Z list of the CDC, and they did not found the word sepsis in this A to Z list, where all diseases. And then, because this young child and the family was known to Chuck Schumer, and he spoke to the CDC and said, CDC, you need to change this, such a disease. And they, ironically, they put it under hospital-acquired infections, where at this time, almost any Center for Disease Control was focused on hospital-acquired infections, whereas it's known now that 80% of sepsis cases develop in the community. And so our system, political system all over the world, perhaps with some exception, were completely blind for such a system. And this, you see, and after I started to realize this, so I said, no, that's not possible. And etc. And then they started, and this was encouraging, because if I would have kept completely alone,
having people,
and not only one, and I to be honest, of course there were some researchers, right, people in the US and at many places who still knew about sepsis, but they were, of course, as most physicians and researchers are, they are focused on their discipline and their science. But what I then learned, and because perhaps I was in some way politicized also in the students' movement times, so I had,
when you joined the green,
yeah, this was a second step. First, it was even much more left.
So you used some of the experience from the past.
The past, I understood that if you want change, you need also to what Rudolf Virchow, by the way, also had. That's his famous pathologist, having been at the Charité. So he was a politician. Also, he was elected in the Prussian regional government. He said that the doctors, medicine has to point to the problems, and the policymaker and the anthropologist, what he says, needs
find solutions
to find the solution. So that, you see, after having that together, in retrospect, drove me not to give up, but to get active. And yeah, so
it's fascinating to see how you learn from past experience and your past experience, from sort of being involved in politics, and also appreciating quite quickly that you need a coalition of healthcare workers and experts, but also, most important, coalition of non-healthcare workers, people who have unfortunately lost people as a result of sepsis, who were able to influence the politicians and get politicians involved to make change and bring sepsis to the forefront and advocate for change. Something which was neglected, you've managed to make it now much more prominent, and there's work being done globally to improve sepsis recognition and save lives, which is fascinating to see. And most people would deal with challenges and struggles at a small level, but you've sort of taken it to the world, really, and that is really fascinating how you managed to do that. Your passion is infectious. Your passion of sepsis, as you speak, you can always feel the passion. And if I've heard you speak in a number of conferences, as you speak, but your passion also means that people, when they listen to you talk about it, they get on board. and if not now, in the future. But there is no, you don't give them the options of do you want to do something about it or not? They have to.
Yeah, but again, as I said, so there is more and more people. There is this Ilse Malfit, who 2 years ago, as a cancer patient, because she was under chemo, developed, got sepsis, went to the oncologist. He did not understand and realized finally she was treated too late. She lost her 2 legs. And not only this, so it took her about 1.5 or 2 years to recover. But then she took action. She looked in her files and she found out that the treating physicians could have realized this
earlier,
36 or 48 hours earlier, and not recognizing and treating sepsis increases their likelihood to die on an hourly basis. So
8% increased by 8%.
Yeah, so that and it's not that high. That maybe in some cases, but it's we know that it's rather 1.5% per hour. But if you are not diagnosed for 36 hours, you know what this means, and some die in 24 hours. So it depends always on the severity of the sepsis. But coming back to this lady, she went to their parliamentarians. They got access to the regional director of WHO. They came with a camera team to our Berlin event on this year's World Sepsis Day. And they wrote a book, Every Hour Counts, and they got the media in Belgium where there was nothing on sepsis. Nothing. There were only congresses, like the largest intensive care congress, where a lot of experts always, including myself, over 15 years, have spoken about sepsis. But this is not enough. You get, as Sir Liam Donaldson also said, when we launched, who was a strong supporter of us, and got this adoption of the resolution, said sepsis was too long in the backwaters, just addressed by enthusiasts. But in order to change things, sepsis must become in the public and the political space where it needs to be to change the things. And this is more and more recognized. And perhaps my contribution to is that having brought it at all on the agenda in the public space is encouraging others. There are many who are not accepting bad things in any areas. But what I learned, and this, if you look at climate change, if you look on the Club of Rome, it was in the 70s. This was not enough. So this Club of Rome, who divined that our resources are endless, and if we continue to go, though we will destroy the world, but only when there is a political and public opinion. Because you see, rightly in the democracies, policymakers say they need to get re-elected, and it's a pity that only this hampers long-term projects to get done. And so I don't want to speak too much about the limitations of it, because there's no better alternative, as we also know. So yeah, so this is a kind of, and I feel we are at a tipping point now, and what one must not give up. And I think this is true. Look how long it took to overcome the notion that that the sun doesn't go around the earth, but it's a different way around. And there are so many examples. Be scientists whose data were for a long time never accepted because they were not compliant with the current paradigm. So that's why this example is not unique. And if one has understood this, and it took me long, you may believe, just to be convinced and to believe more and more in myself. So if you are not educated in an environment where your parents and your grandparents tell you, you are a better class, you are, and there's something in, you see, and of course, but what I want, and you see also, I wanted to quote, when we last time have met in the context of this, why we are here in Africa, because we were able, and we may say this here, jointly to garner 11 million euros given by the German federal government, the Ministry of Science, to create what is called stairs to step up in the fight against sepsis in Africa. And we met for the first time, actually, and at this occasion, for the first time, I also visited this island where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned, Robben Island, for more than 20 years. And this is admirable, indeed. And I sometimes show is, if you believe in it or you believe it, it's only, you never believe it until it's done. So, and it can be done. And I don't want to compare, and I'm not sure, and possibly I'm not sure that I would have been able to overcome such a time, and I admire, and so that's why what I have been doing and still try to do is it's not so exceptional.
So it's really inspirational, and that's a great way to come to the end of the podcast, in terms of inspiring people that it can be done when you're faced with adversity, with persistence, with using opportunities, with learning, with getting the right people on board, especially when it's something that is neglected that you're trying to bring to people's attention, involving the politicians and policymakers, involving people who are affected by the condition. So it's in the media, not just the science, and also expecting adversity. There was so much adversity that you've described that you've managed to tackle.
It's only a little bit of it.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just
of these adversities, but and to have good friends,
networks
from whom you can learn, and you need to be able to learn from others. Because I did not learn much at school. Unfortunately, I spoiled quite some time.
But you learn from others.
I learned from others and try to catch up as good as possible.
Learning from people around you and others, watching them, and you seem to also learn from history. You quote a lot from history.
Yeah, but so I didn't read too many books, but the older I got over time, because learning from others is also reading good books, be it not only even novels, but even more so. I like philosophy quite a lot, but also,
Great, very inspiring, and I want to thank you again. We have a tradition on the podcast, at the end of the podcast, to ask if there is one thing that you would give in terms of advice for somebody faced with a major struggle, one thing they should do, one thing they should not do, one do and one don't.
To do is to resign and to give up, and the other is really, and this has been stressed also by people like Churchill and others, don't miss a good crisis. So there are so many people, be it actors, be it musicians, who faced all for various reasons this. So it strengthens you, and this is what I wanted to say. So this is self-fulfilling prophecy in some way.
Don't miss a good crisis
Yeah.
and use it in your favor.
Yeah.
Use it positively. And that's what you've done through a career of taking a condition that is completely neglected, and now there's a lot of work being done. So again, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to share your stories and your lessons of turning a struggle into success. And amazing.
And by the way, you are not that different.
That's very kind of you. Very kind of you.
Okay.
Really, we learn from each other, and I've learned from you, and I keep on learning from you.